So, focheck XSL FO Framework. It's from the W3C, and as it was originally defined, you were never supposed to actually look at your XSL FO files. Am I missing something? Oh, right. So, XSL FO is fairly widely used, including by some well-known XML conferences, although Yerk has seen the light, and this year's proceedings will be produced with Antenna House, not any other formatter. In XSL FO, you were never actually meant to see the FO files. The concept is that you have your XML gets transformed into the FO vocabulary, but you were never supposed to serialize the XML from the FO. It was meant to just live inside the FO processor. Broken out, and you'll quite often use a separate XSLT processor, so these days you'll transform XML into FO using a separate processor rather than one built into the FO formatter. And as far as I know, every FO formatter will accept either XML plus XSLT or straight XSL FO. And oXygen ships with support for multiple FO processors. It comes with FOP built in, and it has built-in support for the command lines for RenderX and, of course, for Antenna House. One of the things that complicates working with XSL FO is that your formatting is done in terms of formatting objects which have properties, but in FO, many of these properties can be expressions which are supposed to be evaluated by the FO processor. So any schemas up until now for validating XSL FO didn't really take into account the fact that there could be expression there. So you could write a W3C XML schema to handle 12-point as a sort of pattern, but writing a pattern to match arbitrary expressions is something more difficult. So XSL FO, focheck uses a parser written in XSLT to actually parse these expressions. So prior to focheck, this is oXygen 15.1, expressions, all we would complain about is some of the Antenna House extensions, but you can see that some invalid expressions are completely ignored, and you'd end up getting an error message from the FO processor, which you then have to sort out quite separately. And of course, the other problem we had is that available schemas didn't cover all the extensions from Antenna House, which you quite often use for better output. So we made focheck, which is available on GitHub, and it's available, of course, as oXygen framework, and it's built into oXygen 17.1. There's been a few changes on the GitHub version since then. So the first part is that focheck uses the RelaxNG schema for validating the structure of the FO. The schema itself is, most of it is generated using XSLT from the XML for the XSL 1.1 spec, which means I did a whole lot less work and it's more accurate. It's written in the compact syntax for RelaxNG because it was easier to extract parts from the spec as compact syntax because it was quite similar, and then it's translated into the XML syntax for RelaxNG for use with oXygen, and also into W3C XML schema, because as soon as I produced the first focheck version, an Antenna House user said, well, I use W3C XML schema, can you do that? So every release since the second one has also included W3C XML schema version. So the RelaxNG is used for checking the element structure, the required attributes, it does the ID and ID ref checking and the checking of XML lang values. These are sorts of things that are built into most XML schema languages. And everything else is defined for the purposes of relaxNG as just being text, and it's left to the Schematron to parse. So the relaxNG is done in multiple modules. There's the core one, which is the FOs and properties from XSL 1.1, and then there's the inherited properties. Because another feature of XSL FO, which makes it hard to validate, is that properties are defined as applying to specific FOs, but the ones which are defined to be inherited, you could put anywhere on the tree of your FO document, and they've been inherited where they'd be used. So that's and then there's another module for the Antenhouse inherited properties, which I think, again, you can define them, say, on the root, and they've been inherited where they apply. And then there's another module for Antenhouse extensions. And the majority of these are generated using XSLT straight from the XML for the XSL 1.1 spec, or from some simple XML defining the inherited properties. So this is a short excerpt from the XML XSL 1.1 spec. It's all the same thing. Every FOs have an XML ID. There's a paragraph. They all start with a common usage paragraph saying what it is, and the content model is sort of markup, which sort of looks a bit like DTD markup. But it's also links in there. So from that, the XSLT generates generates relaxNG, which you think was pretty simple. You can see the correspondence between the sort of parameter entity-like things from the spec and the pattern names which are used in the relaxNG, and the PC data just turns into text. But there's complications. There's all these extra bits in the text of the XSL 1.1 spec, which make it more interesting. Some formatting objects are defined as neutral, which can appear anywhere and weren't actually in that inline or block selections. Some, the ones for change bars are defined as point FOs, and they can appear practically anywhere inside FO flow. And some are outer lines, which like floats, you can't have a float inside a float. So there's other restrictions. So here's an example of the relaxNG that's produced. It still looks pretty similar. The model for block, we still have our inline FO and our block FO, but we can also have zero wall markers at the start. There's an initial property set which applies only in FO block, and there's our neutrals, and there's our outer line, and then there's our points for the change bars. So all of that was generated with XSLT. The other thing that gets included is that initial paragraph from the text gets included in the relaxNG as an annotation comment, and the reason why focheck translates from relaxNG compact syntax to XML syntax is because when you have relaxNG XML syntax and the annotation comments, then you can get these tooltips appearing when you're editing in oXygen. So properties are pretty much the same. We generate Schematron from the properties. The allowed values, this is boilerplate that's generated. But again, XSL is full of constraints and co-constraints. So there's some handwritten structure checks which are written in a separate Schematron module, and there's some handwritten property checks the column count has to be a positive integer. And as I said, this is the property value in your XML markup is evaluated as an expression. The XSL 1.1 spec has a EBNF for expression language, which I use the Rex parser generator, the generator parser in XSLT that will parse all of these expressions. I had to add, oops, wrong one. I had to add some extra units for the extra units that Antenna House provides, and some of the EBNF in the XSL spec didn't translate well into Rex, so I had to rearrange a few things. But the end result is that it can parse expressions like -1, -2, except Rex produces this parse tree that looks a whole lot like that. But before it gets passed back to the Schematron, there's some other XSLT that just cleans it up and decides that it's a number with a value of 1 positive, and it's not 0. So all of this is run using XSL functions. The Schematron compiles in XSLT, and it can use the XSLT functions. You'd think all of these parse trees and things would slow things down significantly, but oXygen uses Saxon EE, Saxon PE. You can use the Saxon memo function, where Saxon will, for one particular set of parameters passed to the function, Saxon will remember the result that came back, and the next time you pass the same set of values to the function, Saxon won't bother running the function, it'll just return the same values you got before. So for every 12 point it appears as a property value in your XSL FO, and there's probably going to be quite a few in a lot of fixed lengths, the FO check is going to evaluate it once and not have to do it again. So when I did a talk on FO check at XML London last year, at the end I could demonstrate a 28 megabyte FO file was validated using RelaxNG and the Schematron in 6 seconds. Part of this is because of the memo function, and partly because the oXygen fellows tell me that oXygen caches the XSLT that is produced from the Schematron, so it's not continually regenerating the XSLT for the Schematron checking. Except since XML London, I've added a couple of keys into the Schematron. I haven't dared ask what adding keys would do to this caching that they have of the generated XSLT, because if I start adding elements, it's going to add key values. And, I can't hit 6 seconds with that 28 megabyte file anymore, but I can find more errors in it. The other thing that I've started adding recently is Schematron quick fixes. These are some, I was doing something for my talk tomorrow and I wasn't coming out quite right. I realized I was missing some attributes, so I thought I'll just add in a couple of Schematron quick fixes. So it's basically saying, well, for this item body or this item label without the property of interest, if the property is not there, then the Schematron quick fix will offer to insert the most commonly used value. I mean, end indent and start indent in XSL FO have initial values, except, and quite often that's the value you want to use, but in lists, you want to use them to set the separation between the list item label and list item body. So a screenshot here of what would happen. The Schematron quick fix just pops up as when oXygen shows you the error. So as I said, FO check is included in oXygen 17.1. It's not labeled as FO check, it's, I don't know, the FO framework, whatever. It's also available on GitHub if you you can use the oXygen add-on mechanism to point oXygen to a file on the GitHub repository, on the GitHub website, which is the, what's the correct word? Your descriptor for the add-on, which contains the right URL for the current version of focheck. So when you want to update add-ons, it'll tell you whether there's a new version available. This file is generated when I generate the zip files for the release and everything else. So, provided I use the right ant target when I build it, everything stays in sync, and we have the right descriptor, and then I just add the framework files to the release, and you can just update them from within oXygen. Okay, so that's all well and good, but how would you use it? So if you have an FO file, which could be sort of working with an FO file to try things out in the XSL formatter, or it could be the result of a transformation, then focheck will show you many of the errors. I mean, the advantage of using it in the editor is that if you produce something with a fatal error, then you feed it to the FO processor. The FO processor is going to fail on the first fatal error and not find the next one until you fix the first one. But focheck, because it's just doing validating, can potentially find multiple fatal errors in one go. So the first, I have an error here because a co-constraint from that's odd. There should be a Schematron quick fix for this. So, as I said, focheck parses the property values, and it can in fact work out that -1 minus -2 is a positive integer. That doesn't work. Yeah, well. So here's an example of the Schematron quick fix. Again, I was sitting up the back, I shouldn't say this, I was sitting up the back there working on my talk for tomorrow, and there's another thing I did, and I thought, oh, do I have time to put in a quick fix? But I'll do that after tomorrow's talk. So, if you're using oXygen, then you're also probably using the XSLT debugger. Oh, no, I missed something. So oXygen comes with support for running the antenna house batch formatter, but you can also set up on Windows to use the antenna house GUI, and if you have, oh, that's not going to work. If you have the GUI running, then you can run the transformation within oXygen and have it show up in the GUI. If your screen is larger than 1024 by 768, then you could put oXygen side by side with the AH formatter GUI and get an instant update and see them both at once, but it's a bit harder with this screen. As I was saying, you're probably using the XSLT debugger. One thing oXygen doesn't do is let you validate the debugging output. But you can write the output to a file, and so you can have oXygen, the debugger, write the output. It can then also open the output as an editor, and then from there you can fairly obviously validate the generated FO, and of course apply a transformation scenario. Oh, this one made PDF for me, but that's fine. Where am I? So how are we doing for time? 1 minute? We started late. A few, okay. Just keep talking till they drag me off. So that's sort of FO check. The other thing is that Antenna House is a Japanese company, and there's a significant number of Antenna House users in Japan. So I also wanted to have it FO check translated into Japanese. The oXygen folks have been answering my questions about localization on the oXygen users mailing list. So my priorities for translating FO check were the Schematron messages, because they're the bits that I wrote. The documentation annotations were a second priority, because they've probably seen the English in the XSL 1.1 spec. And then it turns out that oXygen uses Jing for validating the RelaxNG, but Jing has never itself been localized into Japanese, and Jing uses Xerces for the actual parsing, and it's never been localized into Japanese. So I'm also getting Jing and Xerces messages translated into Japanese, just so that if you're a Japanese user, you get the complete package of messages. So looking at how to do the translation of the Schematron, you saw in the earlier presentation about what was the problem with Schematron's built-in localization. If you use the existing Schematron XSLT thing, you put in your extra documentation, and you tended to get every language. And I didn't have the access to the internals of oXygen that the oXygen people do, so I didn't think I could sort of rewrite how oXygen did it. So I looked at some other way of translating the Schematron. One possibility is to use, which was suggested by Jurka, is to use his Gettext mechanism, which uses a fairly standard Gettext library to work with .po translation files. But the problem is, when that gets a bit complicated, you sort of have to think backwards, and you turn what's a fairly reasonable message into a function call, and then you've got to break out the values and put them at the end, etc. So that really wasn't going to work for my translator, who isn't a technical person to begin with. So I then looked at extracting all of the Schematron messages I had into a file, a Java XML properties file, and then translating that. And I actually added the ability to work with Java XML property files to the translation tool I was using. But then I thought, well, this is XML. There's no point creating that just to put it back in again. So I modified the computer-aided translation tool I'm using, called Omega T, to understand Schematron directly, and it will present for translation the sentences within Schematron messages. And I've recently modified it again, so it'll also present the Schematron quick fixes for translation. So the end result is that using Omega T, I can translate Schematron to Schematron, and when you have a hammer, everything looks like another format for Omega T. So I can now also extend Omega T to translate the RelaxNG and produce a Japanese version of RelaxNG, from which I produce a Japanese version of the compact syntax in case they want that, or the W3C XML schema. And along the way, I also had translated the messages in the Schematron itself. Schematron, the XSL T style sheets have this not very good, I don't think, way of putting strings together as their internationalization method. And so I had a Japanese translation done. So the end result is that if you set your oXygen to use the Japanese localization, then you can get the Japanese tooltips and the Schematron error messages. And so on my machine, you can also get the Jing messages in Japanese. And once the Japanese has been sort of verified and used for a bit, I'll be sort of giving that to the Jing project as a patch request, and hopefully it'll end up in general use and eventually into a future version of oXygen. But probably, by the looks of it, not many of you are using the Japanese version.
That's the obvious.
What's that? Well, you wouldn't think I wanted it either, but I thought I had a future work slide. Okay, so to finish up, focheck validates XSL1 formatting objects as well as antenna house extensions. It's the only way to do property value expressions inside the editor. It now has some Schematron quick fixes with more to come, and it's available localized for Japanese. And if you pull requests and issues are welcome, most of them actually come from the oXygen people. So, questions?
Yeah. Can you go back to the slide? You said, no, the one after.
Before, after?
Just the last one before question. Yes.
Okay.
Antenna house format and extensions in focheck. So it means other FO generator who don't have the extensions in.
In
the other one.
The other one.
let's say FOP.
Let's say FOP, yes. Things in the FOX namespace. At this point, no, but pull requests and issues are welcome. So if you want FOP extensions in there, a pull request would probably happen quicker than if you.
Well, to be honest, the question was, if I put the extension, are you converting them to Schematron quick fix into your antenna house internal extension?
Oh, I don't understand the question.
No, if I put the FOP extensions.
If you put the FOP extensions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So do you want them to be validated or to be an error to convert it into antenna house extension?
Well, I would. If I was a FOP user, I'd want FOP ones validated. If I.
It means a profile.
Yeah, yes. I mean, it would just be, you just have another top-level Schematron file, and you could set up a different validation scenario to validate FOP, and you could set it up to match on the FOP
namespace. In one scenario, it would be a quick fix to fix it back into.
Well, if I, well, you could, but if you had a lot of FOP extensions you want to convert into antenna house, you just write XSLT and run it on your FO. You'd modify your style sheet to produce antenna house extensions. So, yeah, doing it in focheck would be a sort of very limited use case.
So helping converting to antenna house extension would be a very interesting use case.
Yeah, well, it would certainly report. Well, report that it doesn't know them, but it wouldn't report how to fix them.
Yeah, if there is a similar extension.
Yes, I see that. Well,
that could be an up conversion.
it would be an up conversion from FOP to antenna house. That's just me. Are there any more questions? No. All right. Thank you for your time.